Everybody, a very warm welcome to this seminar that we have prepared, and we're thankful to the 1860 Heritage Center and Selvan Naidu for assisting with setting this meeting up. He's waiting in the wings, and so we'd like to see you sometime, Selvan. But as you know, the center is concerned about the world, concerned about South Africa, and we have our sisters here, and some of them are my daughters, who are going to lead us through some thinking as we ponder on the state of the world, state of the nation. So very warm welcome to all of you joining in from South Africa and from beyond. We have friends who are joining us from the United States, from Australia, from the United Kingdom and beyond. A special welcome to our panelists. We are looking forward to your sharing your wisdom and your experiences from your work. Thank you, thank you, thank you for being part of this panel. And we want to thank our facilitator, our moderator, Siddharthya Pillai. And I'd just like to say a few words about Siddharthya. Siddharthya is a master's student, has a master's in medical law at the University of KwaZulu-Natal, and has completed an MSc in innovation at the University of Edinburgh. She is a qualified Bharatanatyam dancer and has published children's stories. She was the winner in 2019 of the Creative and Cultural Careers Writing Competition. And recently, Siddharthya published a collection of poems entitled Immaterial Reflections. And at the moment, Siddharthya is completing a PhD in management studies. But friends, more than all of this, Siddharthya is actively involved at grassroots level in many community projects, and we will be drawing from her wisdom during the session and beyond. And she's worked with some of our panelists as well. So I hand over to Siddharthya.
Thank you very much, Dr. Govindan, for that introduction. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the 1860 Heritage Center's Dialogue for Women, or for this Women's Month. I'm not going to do a lengthy introduction. I think Dr. Govindan has done a wonderful job, and we would love to hear more from our panelists. I'm going to go straight into it. Today we have a selection of panelists that I'm honored to facilitate. They are extraordinary women. And to start today's discussions, we have Ms. Fasiya Hassan, who was an instrumental actor in the Fees Must Fall movement, which I'm sure we all remember. She is the youngest member of the Gauteng Provincial Legislature, and she has been awarded the Student Peace Prize and was the 11th laureate for this. So Ms. Hassan, if you would please start our discussions for today.
Thank you so very much. This is the first time that I'm interacting with the Heritage Center, and I hope it won't be the last. Some of the work that we've been doing, both in the country but also in KZN, has been really wonderful in bringing me into spaces such as the Heritage Center and being able to be on this panel. So I'm very honored and I'm very humbled. So yes, I think I've been introduced. It's always a little bit of an awkward one listening to one's bio. But today I'm really interested in really unpacking and talking about the topic that we've got: inequality, racism, ethnicity, gender-based violence, but specifically from a youth perspective. And I think it's particularly important because of a number of reasons. The first is that the majority of our country is under the age of 35. So we have a very, very youthful country. And so when you start to unpack different socioeconomic issues, you begin to realize that the majority of those people who are often experiencing those issues are in fact young people. Whether it be youth unemployment, whether it be racism, whether it be about gender-based violence, we know young women in particular are very susceptible to those sorts of issues. And I'm putting this sort of backdrop or this context to the conversation and discussion, because in order for us to have that honest conversation, we need to understand that, that sort of backdrop. But I think what's particularly important as well is how we relate to social cohesion. As a young person myself, we were born post-apartheid. We grew up reading the books, watching the documentaries, listening to the stories of our parents and grandparents. And I think there's a different approach, if I could use that word, to social cohesion. And I think that's a particularly important discussion for us to have, and an honest one, given what's already happened, not just in KZN, but across the country. I'm from Gauteng. We also had difficulty. We also saw a number of different, sort of oh, I don't know, am I still audible? Okay, great. Sorry, I thought somebody had unmuted to say that I wasn't. And we've seen a number of different elements around tension. And I think the first thing I must note is I'm no vanguard. There's no ultimate truth on this matter. I'm just going to share some of my thoughts and some of my ideas. And I think it's important that we do that, understanding that there is no one right solution or one right approach. So number one, social cohesion is an ongoing thing. And I think it's something that we might have left by the wayside. One of the things that was a big project at the turn of democracy, as many people on this panel and who are tuned in will know, was around this project of social cohesion. How do we build a South African society post-apartheid with commonalities to build society and to build a country that didn't necessarily exist before? And I think there was a lot of work done at that time in around the 90s to try and rebuild that element. But we need to ask ourselves the question whether that's been an ongoing process. And that's my first point about what I think we need to discuss, that there is no end point of social cohesion. It's a journey. In order for us to confront inequality, to confront racism, there's no ending point necessarily. It's an ongoing process. And I think that's one thing that we haven't necessarily done as well as we should have as a South African society. And I mean this by and large across the space. And I also say this because as part of a generation who was born post-apartheid, you still have very racist young people who imbue the same sort of kind of vitriol, both racial and economic, and around women. They're very patriarchal, they're misogynistic, they're homophobic, etc. And these are not necessarily a result of the fact of a political system, but reality is a result of societal ideas. So that shows us that we haven't done enough to change society. I also want to talk about this idea of a rainbow nation. The organization that I belong to, people will know here, also talks about non-racialism and the importance of trying to build an element of non-racialism. But I want to speak specifically right now to this idea and the concept of a rainbow nation. And we're seeing amongst the youth generation, in many ways, some sort of a hollowing out of that rainbow nation ideal. And I use the word ideal very intentionally, because it's something that we're working toward. It's not necessarily something that we are at right now. And one of the reasons I think we're seeing this hollowing out of a non-racialism or hollowing out of a rainbow nation idea is also around economic inequality. So in as much as we've got political freedom and we have political rights, we have a constitution that protects all of us, that really gives us the space to be who we are on paper, in reality, what we're seeing is a little bit different. We're seeing the fact that it's very difficult for people to get a job, young people or old, but we know the youth unemployment rate is extremely high. It's actually at a crisis level. We're seeing people across the country being unable to put food on the table, especially now during COVID-19. And then you juxtapose that with what people keep saying, that we have political rights, that we have a rainbow nation, that we have an equal society, when in reality we don't. The bitter truth is that access to opportunity and access to resources and access to the economy is still largely based on racial rights. And until we change that, we are going to be unable to marry the idea of a very, very important concept that we don't talk about enough. Because it's easy for us to say, hey, we have political rights, but you can't eat the right to protest. You can't use the freedom of the press to put food on the table for your kids. You can't do that to clothe your children, and these are very bread and butter issues that cause people to really go down into a very instinctual idea of individual interest. And that's why I think it's so fundamentally important that in a discussion around racism, in a discussion around inequality, we have a discussion around the economic elements of where we find ourselves. I'm not necessarily advocating for the fact that once we give everyone has jobs and economic opportunity, racism will be over. No, I'm not at all advocating for that. I'm saying that it's a fundamental part to bridging the inequality gap and then being able to build a society that is more equal, and that one in a society in which we can relate to each other in a more equitable manner. One of the last points I want to put across is the disillusion that young people are facing. Any scrolling on any social media, you see huge amounts of young people very disillusioned with the system, very disillusioned with the current situation going on. And this is even before COVID-19, even before the unrest. We saw young people who are just feeling that they are not represented. And I think that's another important conversation that we need to have. And when I started off my contribution, I spoke about the importance of young people. We're also in what we call a demographic dividend. And that means that we have a youthful population who, economically speaking, has the ability to support the rest of society. And we are not capitalizing on that. And then you couple that with a lack of ability to access education. That's a big thing. It's one of the big things that brought me into activism. The fact that we have a very commodified education. How many people do we know who had to get loans and bursaries and different things for university education, when in reality, you should be able to just get it. You should be able to apply, obviously have the academic merit to be there, but then be able to just study because that's the right thing to do. It's a public good. It's something that all of us as society benefits from. But in reality, we see it again being linked to access, again being linked to inequality, again not having the opportunities to really determine one's fate. And that you all throw into one mixing pot, and then you have a crisis. You have a youthful population who's sitting at home, unemployed, not getting educated, and that is a recipe for a revolution and a recipe for a disaster. So my final point, structural change. We're not going to fix the current crisis around racism, around inequality, around where we see ourselves now, unless there is a structural change in society. And it's not just a governmental change I'm talking about. I'm talking about how we think, how we interact with each other, how we build societies, how we educate young people. And it goes down to even like a preschool level, a creche level. How many people do we know who create very patriarchal ideas? So, because you're a girl, you must wear pink, you can be emotional, you can cry about things. And if a boy gets hurt, don't cry, be a man. But he's a 4-year-old child. And we imbue these different ideas, and when we wonder later on why we have an unequal society. So I think my big takeaway from today's discussion is that social cohesion is an ongoing process. There's no fixed destination. We do have a recipe or a number of elements in a recipe that could cause us major problems, but we are also a society that has overcome extreme odds in the past. We are a society that is resilient, and we are a society that wants to create a better future. And you saw that even after the unrest. When we went into our communities, I'm in Joburg, but I'm deployed in Pretoria and those areas, so many young people said, well, what can we do to clean up? What do we do to rebuild? What can we do to reclaim the narrative and actually change what's going on the ground? And that for me gave me a lot of hope, because in as much as there's this disillusion, in as much as there's this anger, and there's this, we really can't do this anymore, you still have that part of us who are saying, actually, we want to be a part of a different future and we want to build a different future. And that's ultimately why I'm here. It's ultimately why I ended up becoming a member of the provincial legislature. I was in corporate for a few months and I just couldn't, because for me, there's a much, much bigger project that all of us have to do. And that is rebuilding South African society into something that we mustn't just be proud of it. It's something that we need to be able to celebrate, but something that other countries and other people should be able to benchmark moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Fatia, for that inspiring presentation. I think as a youth, that is something that we need to hear, because we want the youth to build and we don't want to lose our youth to, as you said, becoming disillusioned. Our next speaker is Dr. Leslie Ann Foster, who is the founder of the Masimanyane organization that fights against violence against women and children and gender abuse. And Ms. Foster is also a part of what the organization does is that it's locally rooted, and globally connected. And it works across South Africa and 12 other African countries, and it hosts an international network for violence against women. And Dr. Foster, if you would like to present, I think we have you there.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Good afternoon to all the panelists and all the viewers. Thank you to the 1860 Heritage Center for this important conversation and for everybody that is participating in it. Thank you. I know this conversation is focused on inequality, racism, ethnic and social concerns, and gender-based violence. Because my area of work is situated within the gender-based violence sector, I am going to focus my inputs around these issues. Gender-based violence plays out in all women's lives in South Africa, as we all know, but Black women are impacted upon differently, and they face many more challenges than women who are white. And then what we also see is that there's a rural-urban divide, and with the urban setting, we also have the informal settlements. So those issues of race, of class, of gender play out as inequality in our lives. We are having this conversation in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic. I don't believe any conversation which we have now should not take into account this pandemic. The pandemic has had a profound impact on current discussions because the pandemic has surfaced inequality in very visceral, graphic ways. And we've been forced to confront the violence of our economic systems, which are a key driver of inequality and, of course, a key driver of gender-based violence. Just to give you some statistics, 2.6 million jobs were lost during the COVID-19 lockdowns. 2 out of every 3 jobs were lost by women who are in the informal sector and who were classed as essential workers. 10 million more people have been steeped into higher levels of poverty as a result of the COVID and the job losses. 30% of these people are suffering extreme hunger in our country. 3 million are children who are going hungry every day. And as Fasia said, 63% of young people under 24 years old are the most vulnerable because they are unemployed. Another very scary figure that we heard recently was that 750 learners have dropped out of schools. And of course, this week we heard that some 23,000 girls fell pregnant during the COVID period of the last few months. And these are all specific impacts on women. Reports are indicating that gender-based violence escalated during the 18 months of the pandemic. More than 120 calls to the National GBV Command Center were received in a month. Rape, sexual violence, and femicide increased significantly as reported by the Minister of Police. This week and today, we heard that there were 10,000 more rapes reported between April to June this year, representing an increase of 72.4% in rape in 2021 alone. And a lot of this can be attributed to the COVID pandemic. Inequality is the driver of gender-based violence that is very difficult to address. It is entrenched in our history and the various political systems that were based on race, ethnicity, class, etc. Inequality is intersectional in nature because it traverses economic, social, political, and in our context now, technological areas of our lives. Amina Mama writes that the abuse and violation of so-called Native women has always had a special place in the lexicon of imperial tyranny. The gendered dimensions of imperial tyranny are key to understanding gender-based violence in post-colonial contexts. Such violence ranges from the use of rape as a weapon of war in contexts like Rwanda and Liberia and Sudan now, and to the routine abuse of women and girls in post-conflict or peaceful contexts, such as South Africa or Botswana. In fact, as Sheila Mainchis, Anu Pillay, and Meredith Tertian pointed out, the notion of post-conflict for women is fallacious when we consider the enduring impacts and forms of gender-based violence. The colonial heritage is important. Okay? because it explains the escalation of gender-based violence for two main reasons. And I remember speaking once to Mary Robinson, and she was telling us when we were complaining about the high levels of violence that all post-conflict countries, you know, as Ireland once was, has the spiral in gender-based violence. So the first reason explains the development of specific kinds of gender identities and the associated behavior, like gender relations. Colonial relations shape societal identities in such a way that some persons acquire a sense of themselves as dominant in relation to totally dehumanized and objectified others. And this was what was started in that colonial project and was carried through into apartheid. So it was imported onto our continent and into our country. And we must be very much aware of that. I mean, the very notion of colonialism was one of violence. And this has just infiltrated all other systems. So this accounts for why certain social relationships are rooted in inactions and attitudes that are particularly aggressive and ruthless, ideologies that assume that certain people are entirely inferior or inhuman, rationalize excessive forms of abuse. We haven't dealt adequately enough with these issues in our own history for it to have made a change yet. We're not even acknowledging sufficiently how these elements of violence came into our society and is embedded there through these political systems. And we see it only, well, mainly in the relationships between men and women. And also that the colonial project, as well as apartheid, it was steeped in patriarchy. And those systems became embedded in our society and have been carried through all along. And this is why we have such low value attached to women and women's lives within our country. So in contexts where gender identities overlap with colonial ones, such as ours, patterns of dehumanization become more complex and they become more entrenched and normalized. So if colonialism and racism assume that certain persons are culturally and morally inferior, and gender hierarchies assume that women are wholly inferior, then the status of colonized or marginalized women, in our case it's mainly Black women, is especially diminished. The status is deeply embedded in different cultural images, in texts. In turn, these cultural texts provide models for subjects to define themselves and their place in the world, and a system of representation and self-identification. Therefore, both colonial and gender discourses actively perpetuate domination and corresponding acts of violence and abuse. And I think, you know, we can talk about this at a theoretical level, but we see it. We see how apartheid and colonialism is embedded in our media, the way, you know, women are stereotyped. We listen to the lyrics of certain songs, and it continues to build on that. Our advertising images all perpetuate stereotypes of Black women and Black women's bodies and lives that continues this culture, you know, of disrespecting women. So the second reason for the significance of the colonial project is that it is situated, that it instituted violence as a constant and inescapable aspect of social, political, domestic life. And by that we mean that right from the beginning, violence was one of the key ways in which people were discriminated and oppressed. And it became a part of political, social, and domestic life. And it's just, you know, in the sort of DNA of our society now to a large extent. Toxic masculinities were imported here through the colonial project and then carried on through the apartheid system. So the institutionalizing of brutal and coercive rule has meant that all forms of social organizing hinge on the use of violence or the threat thereof. We have this in our everyday lives. It's there all the time. So our roots for gender-based violence are rooted in this history. What has been a serious impediment for us is that the response which we as a country took was to deal with women as victims. That's the kind of welfare approach which the country has taken. And to deal, I've just come out of a meeting, we've had a big conversation around this again, is that women the fact that we are viewed as victims of sexual violence speaks to the project of the low status of women, keeping that status low, not recognizing women's agency, not giving them full rights, not seeing them as equal partners or equal members of our society. So even if we've got the guarantees in the Constitution, what lives out in the realities of women's lives is a completely different situation altogether. And then I just wanted to also locate this in a broader context. You know, when we talk about inequality, one of the biggest challenges for women is economic inequality. And our economic systems are decided upon and developed at a global level. So geopolitically, the economic systems are set up to foster inequality, to maintain inequality between the North and the South, you know, between the rich and the poor. So the systems are not set up to eradicate poverty. And when we come down to a national level, what we find is that our policies here have to mirror those at the global level, which does not, and the neoliberal approach does that. So at a structural level, we have to work at dismantling that. We have to work at it. We have to recognize that it's there and then work at dismantling it, because the change for women is never going to come unless we actually are fighting at these different levels. So when we're talking about gender-based violence and we talk about it only as a private issue, we then make invisible the structural violence which is there, which we have to be fighting against. I want to speak a little bit about what the pandemic did besides.
Dr. Foster.
Yes.
Sorry, I'm so sorry to cut you off. But I think we do have to move on to the next speaker. Would you like to just wrap up quickly, and then maybe we can engage again during the discussion? My apologies for that.
What I wanted to mention here was just that the COVID pandemic had a massive impact on all our lives, but it had a very particular way in which it impacted on Black women, on rural women, on young women, where, you know, their access to support, their access to services were seriously limited. Access to healthcare was limited. Access to water and sanitation had a major impact on the lives of rural women. But women from privileged society, middle-class women and white women, didn't have the same kinds of challenges. But what was different was that all women across the color spectrum were subjected to higher levels of violence against women. Thank you. I'll stop at that because we can engage later on.
Thank you so much, Dr. Foster, for that engaging talk, because I think there's a lot to be said about the colonial past and, as you said, the colonial project, which I'm going to relate to Fasiha again later in our panel discussion. Our next speaker is Dr. Ashantewa Ngide. She is the director of the Institute of Africology and was appointed the National Advocate for Social Cohesion by the Department of Arts and Culture by the Minister. Dr. Ngide, if you would like to start. Thank you.
For a minute, greetings to my panelists and to those who are listening. For a minute, I wish I was just an observer. Listening to the two speakers before, I just didn't want to be a panelist, because I was busily writing and getting so much very, very important gems. So what I thought I would do is, with that said of me being appointed, I'm one of the 62 people across the country who was appointed as a social cohesion advocate. And for KZN, we are 11 that sit on the Social Cohesion Council. So I want to break it down, because when we talk about social cohesion, and we've been saying that many people use the word, but in terms of its definition, we kind of throw it around. So allow me to just do one thing and just, you know, in terms of how I understand my role as an advocate for social cohesion. The society's ability, so I'm using Burns' definition on social cohesion of 2018. The society's ability to secure the long-term well-being of its members, including equitable access to available resources, respect for human dignity, with regard for diversity, personal and collective autonomy, as well as responsible participation in the civic affairs of one's country. When I saw this definition, I thought, okay, I can do this. But then it went further to talk about, what are some of the key driving forces that is leading us towards this social inclusion and social cohesion. And three of them that are particularly important for us is social inequality, resistance, resentment, and reconciliation, institutional and leadership capacity. Because for a long while, people say there's no leadership. But when I look at, even on this panel, the work of the women leaders that they've been doing in their different agencies, and the speaker before alluded to that, when we do speak, we are speaking on behalf of victims. We're not seen to be speaking as people who have an intelligence around the issues that we are faced with. And so as an advocate during the unrest, I visited 11 communities. And one of the things that so what they did earlier this year, so to give you an idea of what the advocates do, we created amongst ourselves 12 work streams. And the work streams are as follows: youth, community development, safety and social justice, arts, culture and heritage, sport and recreation, media and communication, advocacy and education, which is the one that I lead, disabilities and the rights of the elderly, children's rights and positive parenting, gender-based violence, social inclusion and community building, climate and environment, economic growth and inclusion. And those were the 12 work streams coming from all the advocates are chosen because of the advocacy that they're on or the agency. And then we decided to go further. So in Durban, for example, when we visited Clarewood, Phoenix, Montclair, Blackburn, Bryden, Umzinto, Amamzimtote, Northdale, in Pietermaritzburg, when we came out of those meetings, we decided that, having community police forum just cannot be enough. Having all these political war rooms cannot be enough. We found activists, old people, young people, women, men who said, we want to be in a different kind of an engagement. And so we decided that we were going to create what we call social cohesion and peace building forums. And these are all constituted by people who said, I put my hands up, I'm going to be part of the new understanding of how to build peace. So on the 13, 14, and 15, we're going to be at Kwamutle Museum, where we're going to be retraining community leaders from these communities on the importance of peace building, on the skills of conflict resolution, and monitoring and evaluation of community actions. So that is what came out for us as advocates from the unrest. But as a Pan-Africanist leader and teacher and educator, one of the things that I looked at when we were talking is, what are the principles that engage us as Africans? We talk about Ubuntu, but what are the key things that we use to recognize it when we recognize each other across our race groups, our diverse groups, our religious groups? And so at my institute, one of the key fundamentals is the Nguza Saba. Nguza Saba is Kiswahili for the 7 principles. The first principle asks that we commit ourselves to umoja, unity, to strive for and maintain unity in our family, in our communities, in our nations. The second one is kujichakulia, which is self-determination, to define ourselves, name ourselves, create for ourselves, and to speak for ourselves. Ujima, which talks about collective work and responsibility. It is a principle that asks us to build and maintain our communities together and make our brothers and sisters' problems our problems, and to learn to solve them together. The fourth principle is called Ujama, which is cooperative economics. And it says to build and maintain so much that we can learn from each other about how we run stores, how we run our shops, how we run businesses, and how we profit from them, and what do we do with the profits. The fifth one is called Nia, and it's about purpose, to make our collective vocation, our calling, the building and development of our communities in order to restore our people to their traditional greatness. Africans have to remember that we have always been a great people, and our children must be reminded every day about the geniusness of being an African, but also the creativeness. The sixth one is called Kumba, and it's about creativity. To do always as much as we can in the way we can in order to leave our communities more beautiful and beneficial than we inherited. And in closing, the last principle, which for me, you know, these are what embodies, because social cohesion has to be personal. And from personal, it must become your family, it must become your community, it must become the greater extended South African community. The final principle of Nguza Saba is Imani. And Imani is about faith, to believe with our hearts in our people, our parents, our teachers, our leaders, and the righteousness and the victory of our struggle as a country, as a continent, in trying to find ways to connect in cohesiveness. You know, my young people always say, so social cohesion, is this about kumbaya, getting together? You know what? It really is about us finding our strength in who we are as women, as culturalists, as whoever we are, whatever we have chosen. But the most important thing is to live in a community and a country that allows us and enables us and protects us to be what we are for the betterment of a country that we are building. And it is Women's Month, so I'm going to be bold to say, no nation can rise higher than its women. Siyabonga.
Lovely.
That was, I have no words. I mean, that was incredible and just so inspiring. And Dr. Ngidi is packing some serious armor there with that beautiful continental ring. It was absolutely wonderful to listen to you, Dr. Ngidi. Our next speaker is Ms. Lisa Aziz, who is the founder of Action in Autism and is on the Presidential Working Group for Disability. And I'm so honored to introduce her today. Ms. Aziz, would you like to start? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dartia. After the talk by Dr. Ngidi, I feel so innovated and excited to be part of this panel and to see these amazing women. I think these kinds of social engagement and conversations, really difficult conversations, because we didn't have them when we post 1994. We didn't go to the really nitty gritty, difficult conversations that we needed to heal. And there hasn't been enough platforms for healing to happen in South Africa. And hopefully after the events of the 12th to the 15th of July, we can find that within ourselves to create those platforms, to find women and to find community members to come together and find moments of healing and to talk about broken past and how we can move from there. I'm going to take a little bit of a different tack. I'm going to speak a little bit about the personal journey that I've been on for the past 16 years and how in some ways social cohesion has helped through a very urgent need that brought us together as a community. So I have a 21-year-old son with autism. And when he was denied to education, I, together with several other parents who were equally as desperate as I, founded the NGO Action in Autism in 2005. And through this 16-year-old journey of lobbying and advocacy, I've encountered many parents of children with disabilities, people with disabilities who share a common identity and a camaraderie. As mothers, our experiences are markedly different from mothers of neurotypical children, and yet we constantly occupy a marginal position and are often not recognized or supported for the extraordinary efforts we take in sustaining our homes and lobbying and for change with our people and walking alongside our people with disabilities. So on the 12th of July, 2021, both my son and I were on day 6 of COVID quarantine, having contracted the virus from an unknown source. We, like everyone else, sat fixated on our screens, watching the deluge of news reports and social media posts. We heard the gunshots down our road as we sat huddled together on our couch. Like everyone else, I felt bereft. I was scared. I felt a deep pain in my heart, and I had to control my son's overwhelming anxiety. One of the comorbidities of his autism is huge anxiety. I was thankful that we had food in our home, a daughter on call who would come to us in the case of an emergency. We replayed and watched those images, as did millions of others in South Africa, of people taking food and goods out of stalls. I was added onto the Community Safety Watch during that time, a place I had strategically steered clear of because of the racist overtones and the political grandstanding that you find on these community watches. I kept a close eye on the WhatsApp support group we created for our autistic community during the lockdown levels 5, bringing the support of 2 clinical psychologists to help calm the pervasive fear and panic our people were experiencing. Many were closer to the action, with the gunshots and fires creating sensory overwhelm and a flight, fright, and freeze response in our autistics. The toll on the mental health of the disabled community, as well as the broader South African population, is immeasurable. Whilst we are a stoic people, I cannot see how this event did not irreparably mark us in some way. And as we process these events and attempt to come to terms with it, and we sift through the groundswell of opinion for and against governments, the overwhelming influx of information and media perspectives, we have to go back to the drawing board to look at the fundamental inequalities that persist in our society. The fact that 43% of our people are unemployed, the fact that 12 million of our people go to bed hungry every single night. My focus is specifically on women with disabilities and caregivers of people with disabilities. So we know that according to the 5.54 target of the Sustainable Development Goals, women are disproportionately concentrated as caregivers of family members with disabilities. Furthermore, while men with disabilities are more commonly cared for by their wives, women with disabilities, and I would include mothers of children with disabilities, are more likely to be abused or deserted by their husband and left alone to care for themselves. They are therefore disproportionately affected by the lack of recognition and social support for unpaid care and domestic work. And many are unable to work because of this burden of caregiving. They receive no compensation for this and are often shamed for living off their children's care dependency grants or their adult children's disability grants. Whilst the provision of educators for learners with disabilities has improved marginally, in KZN, for example, Action in Autism partnered with the Department of Education to host the Autism Indaba of 2011, which resulted in the Autism Action Plan. This ensured that all 72 special needs schools in the province catered for autistic learners and received annual tranches of 200,000 to accommodate the needs of these out-of-school learners and those with high support needs. However, despite this, many children with co-occurring conditions and high support needs remain at home and are in the care of their parents, and in almost all cases in the care of their mothers. Particularly vulnerable are rural women with children with disabilities. This, of course, has been exacerbated during COVID, which Leslie Ann Foster has already alluded to, and we find now more and more children sitting at home. The lack of access to education for children with disability goes hand in hand with poverty, and many research studies have supported this. Without resource and support, this can be a very isolating experience for many women. According to Women's Mental Health, the facts, the World Health Organization, depressive disorders account for close to 41.9% of disability from neuropsychiatric disorders among women compared to 29.3% among men. The burden of care falls on women, and without support structures, they are predisposed to mental health conditions, thus making it more difficult to support their loved ones with disabilities. I have a few case studies to report. Of course, I've changed the names, but I will just mention just one or two because we are running out of time. I'm running out of time. Gugu is a single mom to an autistic son with high support needs. The school asked her to remove her child because they could not accommodate him because of his high support needs. Gugu is the only person working in the family, and she sustains her unemployed brother and sister. Her son was forced to remain at home because of the lack of schooling facilities. The neighbors took out a protection order against her and her son for creating a nuisance. He stims by making a loud noise. The lack of support from the community further marginalized this mother who was trying desperately to provide for her family under the most trying of circumstances. Fortunately, the magistrate of the court dismissed the case. Action in Autism acted as a friend of the court and represented her autistic son. We continue to host a knowledge sharing session within the community of Kwamakuta where this happened. Another really sad case due to the mother of a 9-year-old with autism was traumatized when her daughter returned from school, a school hostel with STDs. Her daughter is non-speaking and is unable to disclose who the perpetrator is. We do not have a justice system that provides access to persons who have an alternative means of communication, let alone persons with disabilities. They are particularly susceptible to abuse because of their inability to speak. In this case, justice was not served. Mum left her job to care for her daughter at home. COVID-19 and the state of national disaster wreaked havoc on families with people with disabilities. Particularly hard hit were single mothers, sustaining households on meager amounts of money, providing caregiving support 24/7 with no access to respite and support and unable to leave the home to get the basic necessities. In addition, there was no access to mental health services, with the hospitals generally being no-go zones because of the pandemic. So Action in Autism set up a WhatsApp support group, and through this process, we were able to provide pro bono mental health services to many caregivers who were feeling suicidal and were in clinical depression. Where support from social development is inaccessible, we continue to provide food hampers to those in need. More recently, we've encountered many mothers of children with autism and disabilities who were unable to access safe houses and escape volatile partners. Research has proven that women remain with abusive partners because of economic dependency. In all of these cases, the social workers we referred them to indicated that safe houses could not accommodate their children with disabilities or were not, and this is ironic, safe enough for their children. So what then are the recommendations? The exclusion experienced by women and girls with disabilities and caregivers of people with disabilities is not simply a women's issue or a woman with disabilities issue. It's a social issue that requires active participation of women, men, girls, and boys. In fact, all gender choices. This can be described as a gender and development rather than a woman in development approach. Both mainstream policies and programs and initiatives aimed specifically at people with disabilities should have a cross-cutting gender component to ensure the inclusion and empowerment of women. And this is supported by Article 6 of the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. A thorough examination of the draft policy on the provision grant should underwrite the Social Assistance Act. This must include a provision for caregiving support, personal assistance to both children and adults with disabilities, to support women who are forced to live off their children's care dependency grant because they are unable to work. I strongly advocate for the Universal Basic Income Grant. In my work as an advocate for disability, I see the difference the disability grant or the care dependency grant has on a family. Once people are removed from the crisis of hunger, they are better able to attend to their other needs. That is the education of their children, access to healthcare. It gives them agency in their lives. An education endeavor should be hosted to examine the gaps for the full inclusion of people with disabilities who sit at home without any stimulation and support. The issue paper on the domestication of the UN Convention of the Rights of Persons with Disability has been disseminated for public comment. Overwhelmingly, the disability sector is calling for a disability bill to protect the rights of persons with disabilities. This bill must make provision for women and caregivers to be viewed as people requiring targeted supports. Such approach will ensure the human rights of persons with disabilities and their families to dignity and equality, and that should constantly be promoted. The mental health of women with disabilities and caregivers should also be prioritized while ensuring that these mothers are not further stigmatized because they seek psychological and psychiatric support. Finally, in terms of policy and legislation, and in order to secure equal treatment of women with disabilities and women as caregivers, it is not enough to outlaw discriminatory laws and policies. positive and compensatory programs must address the legacy of discrimination, and this must include women with disabilities and mothers of children with disabilities. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Aziz, for your contribution. It is heartbreaking to hear what children with disabilities have to go through in this country because of the systemic factors that are not addressed. Our next speaker is Dr. Ina Mshuape, who I think needs no introduction to South Africans. She's a renowned author, writer, creative artist extraordinaire, and when I got to speak to her today, I had a little fangirl moment because I've grown up seeing her on TV. Dr. Mshuape.
Sanbonani, it's a great honor to be amongst you today and to listen to the fellow panelists. It's such an important gathering. I wish that we could be together in person, but that's not to be. In the meantime, this old man, Corona, he doesn't want to go anywhere. I wish to thank the 1860 Heritage Center for bringing us together in this manner, and also to let us hear what the concerns are in terms of who is in which space in South Africa today. Sometimes you get swallowed by where you are in the work that you are doing. I am the director of the Namasiko Arts and Heritage Trust. And also this year, when we celebrated the 20-year anniversary of the Nozincwadi Mother of Books Literacy Campaign, it was hard to believe that it has been 20 years. Sometimes it feels like it's not real, like you're just making it up. When we started, it felt like it would be just a few months, and then it continued and continued. I have been to so many schools around South Africa. I know the map of my country in all 9 provinces according to what school is in what area, and the lack of books in our children's lives. And then we say our children can't read. I have been to so many places where poverty is there, where I've seen myself in some of those children with no shoes, children with uniforms that have been washed and washed and washed, and that you can't make them whiter or any other lighter color anymore, but they are clean and they are here to learn. They are not here to show what they are wearing. And so it has been amazing to meet teachers who are so dedicated in spite of all the poverties and all of the disadvantages and the lack of facilities. They give everything of themselves. And so when we are talking about teachers who are not doing anything, we forget those teachers who are just giving and giving and giving and nourishing and being social workers and being second parents and being so much in the lives of our children. We entrust our children, to those teachers. And also, when we look at the distances children walk to schools and the fact that children are not safe in this country, I don't understand. How can we talk about a future when we are not talking about children being loved, children being protected, children being nourished and encouraged, and their dreams being uplifted by us believing in them? So all of that, for me, it matters a lot. The work that I'm doing as a person in the creative arts and as a preserver of heritage, it is important to know that our time, yes, but we are passing on the baton to many, many young people who are doing phenomenal things. And we need to celebrate them, to honor them, to affirm them, those people who are doing wonderful work. And I think when we see young people trying to employ one another, because the unemployment is real in this country, it's not something to play with. It is real. So many young, willing, and able children, black and white and Indian, colored, whatever color you want to put them, they don't have that feeling of hope that things are going to happen. I have graduated now. There's a possibility of a job. The jobs are becoming less and less. And then arrived this man, Corona. He is busy walking. And he knows that he's invisible. You can't even duck. You can't even hide. You can't even run because he's there, right there, every single day. And we say, our weaknesses are shown for the world to see. and all of the lies and the promises of the services that would be provided for people in poor communities. And there's this term that they use, I don't know why, who came up with this term, the poorest of the poor. Hey, we are serving the poorest of the poor. Like, who came up with that? You care about people in those poor communities, but you don't go around and talk about the poorest. You must care about everybody. Because when you nourish somebody, you should be nourishing somebody who's going to nourish others as well. That's what we are entrusted to do. I look at the work we are doing at Namasiko, and when this lockdown started last year, we were terrified. We didn't know what was going to happen. And also there was this belief that it's going to be a few weeks, maybe a month or two. We never imagined that COVID was going to be here with us all this time. Hello? Are we good?
Sorry, can I just ask anyone who's entering the room to please switch off your video and your audio, please, so we don't disturb our speakers. Thank you so much. Sorry, Dr. Mshoke, please continue.
And then you look at how this lockdown has affected people in the creative arts. It's like we are the stepchildren. When we listen to the politician speaking, or the president is having whatever is called the family meeting. Artists, that's a foreign word to him. He doesn't think about people in the creative arts. We're going to deal with artists when it's time to celebrate, whenever that will be. And so many artists have lost everything, and others have had their cars repossessed, their community accommodation taken away from them. There's been so much depression and sadness and embarrassment and everything that goes with that amongst people in the creative arts. And also, it has meant that no matter what people have been creating, it has been so hard to showcase what you're doing. We need to know about rugby. Thank you very much. Very important, because there's a Ministry of Sports and then Arts and Culture. And so we need to make sure that the people in the sports are there. They are performing, they're doing whatever they have to do, and they're busy winning and kissing each other and hugging each other and celebrating each other. And we get told how well they are doing in spite of lockdown. And then you deal with the fact that when artists are not seen as equal citizens of this nation, it means that we are not celebrating our fundamental thing called heritage. Without culture, without heritage, a nation can't be a nation. We need to have a sense of identity. And who's in charge of that? It's people in the creative arts. Baba Credo Mutwa always said, we, the creatives, are the healers. We are the ones who make sure that in every home, in every community, in every village, in every town, there is healing through the work we do. We create what is beautiful, sometimes out of what seems like it's nothing. So the creative arts are extremely, extremely important. With no culture, there's no future. That's a fact. Then I look at up and coming young artists who were coming and seeing themselves beginning. Some of us who have made our names, who've succeeded over the years, and what, even if things go down and then we've got no work, and sometimes we feel really some pain and feeling like the doors are closing and the clouds are dark. What about those who have not even started? What about them? They've got names, they've got dreams, they've got creativity. There is so much that they are wanting to say out there. Everybody wants to be seen. Everybody wants to be heard. Everybody has got a story to tell. When we talk about heritage, we're talking also about history telling. We adopted a tree at the second half of 2019, and we started doing events once a month under the storytelling tree at the Bluff Showgrounds. One of the first events we had, we were so blessed. You've no idea how it was just like, is this happening in my lifetime? A comrade from Ikopo, a comrade of Mama Margaret Mngadi. I don't know how many of you know who Margaret Mngadi was. I was master of ceremonies at the event where the names were being changed. We were doing this event at the City Hall, not City Hall, at the ICC. I promise you, so many people kept asking, who's this Margaret Mngadi? Haibo, who's this Margaret Mngadi? And when I asked, they said to me, don't worry, comrade, we're going to give you the information. Don't worry, comrade. It took me years to find out who Margaret Mncadi was. I wonder how many of us know here in this gathering who Margaret Mncadi was. A medical doctor, a brilliant mind, a freedom fighter, a woman who was part of the South from Itopo, who worked so hard to rally the women from the South to get ready to travel to Pretoria on that fateful day, the 9th of August, 1956. 2 years before I was born, there she was, a firebrand. And who was addressing us? The one woman who was still alive at the time in August 2019. Her name was Mrs. Tenza, and she came to address us, and she told us so many things. We were sitting there feeling like, how can we be so privileged? Why is this not on live television so that everybody can hear, to know why the women's prison was built in Pretoria? So many things happened, or how they traveled to Pretoria. And oh my goodness, what stories we've heard under the storytelling tree, every month meeting in this place. And now, when I'm talking about history telling, I'm not only talking about women's stories, because they matter. Yes, our stories matter. We need to be telling them over and over, because women freedom fighters were not just partners or lovers of sisters or brothers or grandmothers or wives of freedom fighters. They were freedom fighters too. We were there, we traveled the journey. So we need to tell our stories. History telling matters. That is how we preserve our heritage. And unless we do that, we are going to go around looking at other people's heritages and other people's stories and imitating what other nations are doing. We can't be doing that. The stories of people who are doing wonderful work in our country, people like Mama Siza Ngubane, who passed away in December. She's been fighting to get women to get back their land in rural South Africa. And you know what has happened recently with the Ingonyama Trust and the land. It has been a victory. And Mama Siza Ngubane, where she is in the land of the ancestors, she's smiling with that killer smile of hers. She has worked so hard, and I'm so grateful. Mama Loretta Ngobo, she wrote an amazing book. It was called And They Didn't Die. If you never read that book, go get it. It's called And They Didn't Die by Mama Loretta Ngobo, talking about women who held the fort when the men were out in the mines, working, dying, sweating in those mines. They held the fort, and they made sure that they fought for the land that is the land of our ancestors. Talking about heritage and history telling, I also think social cohesion cannot happen unless we honor and love and show pride in our young people and people with disabilities, people who have had no education, not because they didn't want to, and people who have been marginalized in different spaces, and people who are living in communities where there's no water. Can you believe it? We are told, let's wash hands, sanitize, and wash hands with what? They don't have water to drink. Never mind water to cook and clean. Now they don't have water. And we keep hearing that the next big world war that will come, it will be around water. We can't do without water. Nothing can happen. Our bodies are more than 60% water. The ocean out there, we live in Durban, the ocean is more than 70% of the oxygen that we breathe. So water is everything. We cannot say we have a future. And then people are fighting for better ablution facilities in rural schools, to have toilets. How are we going to have that when you don't have water to drink, and then you want to be done with pit latrines? We say, let's be realistic in what we are fighting for. Let's fight for children to be protected in more ways than one. We look at children who do not have water, children who do not have books, children who are abandoned by their communities, children who are hidden away because they've got one form of disability or another, and then there's hardly any books that speak to these subjects. Coming up are two of my books that are going to be published in Braille. We're going to be launching on International Day of Literacy. You know the venue, under the storytelling tree. We are going to be launching these 2 books, and we're going to be having people who know how to read Braille, people who are blind. And it is extremely important for us to step back and let them stand forth and show us what they are made of. And they will share their songs and their poems and their creativity and their heritage and their history telling. That is important. That is our job. We've got to do that. We're talking about social cohesion. We cannot talk about social cohesion without talking about women and child abuse. All of these numbers that they are brandishing about the number of children that are pregnant, who impregnated them? An 8-year-old, a 10-year-old? What do they know about sex? It is grown-up men, the same men who are flooding at the entrance at the universities, supposedly blessing our children. That's blasphemous. So let's talk and be real about these things. I think also would like to share a poem with you. I don't know how much time we've got. Do we have time for a poem?
2 minutes.
Woohoo! How are we going to do this? How are we going to do this? Trying to speak on fast forward is hard. Well, you're going to tell me when to stop. This one is called You Are the Life Givers, Ninzala Bantu. Women, Makhosikazi, let your voices be heard. Ninzala Bantu. You are the life givers, daughters of Africa, empresses and warrior queens. You have been the light givers, and you have every right to be here as happy citizens of the human race. What is it that gives murderers and rapists such a special place on the sunny side of the street? Protected and forever said to be innocent until proven guilty. Police are forever investigating at a chameleon's pace. Magistrates are granting bail even at the expense of future victims. Justice for some cannot be justice for all. Ninzala Bantu, you are the life givers, nurturers, and nation builders. The first teachers and instillers of self-love and confidence, celebrating every milestone in a little child's journey through life. Fathers can choose to stay or walk away. But mothers, grandmothers, sisters, aunts have to stay. They've got to keep the fires burning for those little precious beings from the spirit world. They are the ancestors reborn, recognized in the first toothless smiles from birth to adulthood. Sacrifices have been made at every turn. Ninzala Bantu, women of my land, you are the life givers. You must declare a state of emergency. Say enough, enough, enough of all of this blood and tears drenching our soils. Wailing voices, shattered dreams, and broken bodies by men who were born, loved, raised, and cherished by you. Erupting volcanoes of deep hatred. What is this? Burning lava directed at the very source of recreation, the God-given right of bringing life into this world. It is covered in disgraceful, abominable acts of war. Even the tiny earthworm knows that woman destruction equals self-destruction for the whole of the human race. Ninzala Bantu, you are the life givers. Your voices must be listened to. The bringers of light, you are the healers, the central fireplace of hope in the palm of your hands. Lay unique maps of the future. Embedded in your womb is the love volcano exploding in starry Milky Ways, ever living, ever giving. Oh, you are the creating and regenerating powers of healing every second from time immemorial, anointing future leaders, centuries unborn. Now enlighten me. What is there not to love? Enlighten me. What is there not to admire? Enlighten me. What is there not to treasure, to honor, to shelter, to protect and adore? Women, women of the world, Ninzala Bantu, you are the torch bearers. You are the life givers. We salute you, women of the land. You are the second Second, holders of that torch from the Creator who makes sure that you bring life into this world, and you must be celebrated today and always.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mshope, for that inspiring poem. I mean, I have a very difficult job today because I have to manage time, and I don't really want to tell anyone to stop talking because everyone has these insights that just keep building us and making us feel more powerful. And I am so grateful to be a part of this and just to be able to listen in. Yes, thank you so much, Dr. Mshope. And our last speaker today is Pregs Govender. She was previously the ANC MP for 8 years and is working towards an institute for transformative feminist leadership, which is so vital in this country, as we have seen. I think what has happened with these previous speakers is that an argument has been built up. And I hand over to Pregs Govender, who's also part of the Human Rights Commission, to close us off with her work and her insights. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much. And thanks to all the speakers who have gone before me. Your wealth of wisdom and insight gives me great hope for what we can collectively achieve in trans society. And I think I'd like to just, because of the time, I'm going to just deal with a few things. I'm going to deal with the question, what it is that creates poverty, inequality, unemployment, precarious employment, because this is not accidental. It is caused by systems of power. And these factors increase whilst the world is a patriarchal, misogynistic world. These factors of poverty and inequality deepen women's vulnerability to gender-based violence. And so unless we look at that question of those systems of power, the economic systems of power, we're not going to be able to change gender-based violence, no matter how much of hard work we do. Every single one of us across our world is doing huge amounts of work. And yet we continue to face a tsunami of problems of gender-based violence and all kinds of other problems in our world. So I want to look at that system. And it is a system, an economic system that has, I think existed like apartheid and like colonialism before it, and like neoliberal capitalism today, are deeply racist, patriarchal, and violent economic, political, and social systems that exploit the earth and humanity for the benefit of a handful of local and global owners of capital. And the power to change that. So when I came into Parliament in 1994, there was great expectation that we would be able to make decisions that would change people's lives. And yes, we were able to end apartheid legislation, set up the Domestic Violence Act, and all kinds of legislation that improve women's rights in society, in the workplace, in homes. And there was the challenge of implementation. There was even an attempt to address the budget and to look at how does the budget become gender responsive. And there was a commitment from national government. So there was a cabinet commitment to decrease military spending and reallocate to women's empowerment in 1996, the year of Beijing, the implementation of the Beijing Platform for Action. And yet, despite all of these commitments, what is it that doesn't change? In the same year, 1996, the policy that we adopted as a country was GEAR. That was a policy that was very much a neoliberal economic framework. And even up till today, the austerity budget cuts that we've seen to education and to health in a year of the pandemic reflects the priorities of the world, not just of our country, it's the priorities of the world. So in terms of, I want to just take a few areas. I want to take the question of, you have the rights, the human rights that we've enshrined in our constitution, like the rights to healthcare, to education, to water, to housing, to food, to employment, to decent employment, working conditions, to safe environment, to healthy environments. And that's enshrined in our constitution. At the same time, we have global agreements and contracts which we are bound by, and the world is governed by. So the General Agreement in Trade in Services doesn't see these as human rights. It sees all of these as commodities to be bought and sold by the highest bidder. So for example, right now in South Africa, the New York Times this week released the details of the contract that Johnson & Johnson basically coerced South Africa into accepting. It said, you either accept our terms or there'll be no vaccines. And the terms were such that today, while South Africa ordered 31 million doses, Johnson & Johnson exported 32 million doses out of South Africa in the plant that has been established in South Africa in the recent months, while South Africa only received 2 million doses, for which it paid more than what the EU paid for their doses. I just want that to sink in for a minute. In the center of this pandemic, when we are facing one of the most deadly crises that our country and the world has faced, the bargaining has happened, has put profits of, and I want you to look at the profits that vaccine manufacturers have made in this time. Oxfam estimates that the vaccine manufacturers have made $3.9 trillion. $3.9 trillion. So the question of, we can say in our constitution, we can work really hard. The people of our country between 92 and 94, Women's National Coalition, we went around the country asking women what it is they wanted to see change in future South Africa. And these were all the demands they put forward: end to gender-based violence, food sovereignty and security, water, clean drinking water, and decent sanitation in schools, education, etc. But if you have profits as the major driving force, you're not going to be able to change this. So in terms of healthcare, in the week before the unrest happened, South Africa was being praised for progress on the vaccine rollout. And then we all got totally consumed by what was happening in terms of the conflict. And I'd like to in terms of, for example, right now, we've had also a lot of attention being placed on climate change and the questions around the destruction, the impending destruction of the earth and of humanity. There's a small window of opportunity of about 10 years for us to get this right. But if you have water, for example, and Ina has just spoken about water, we think of water as a human right. So in the Human Rights Commission, we went province to province having hearings on water and sanitation. But what we wanted to know, and what we still need to know, is who uses most of South Africa's water. It's industry, it's the big corporations. Who wastes most of South Africa's water? It's the big corporations, it's agribusiness, it's the big industries. Who's stealing most of South Africa's water? In the middle of a drought in the Western Cape, Nestle and other bottling companies were bottling South Africa's water and selling it back to people to profit. Right now, there are countries in the world which are trying to address water theft through legislation. But you cannot have a situation where, if you want to deal with the energy crisis, we don't ask the question, who is using wasting and stealing most of South African water. When we think about it, we think about people who are poor in informal settlements. The statistics show us that the vast majority of theft, of electricity theft in our country, is being committed by big industries, by big corporate powers. We can fight all we want against corrupt government, and we must. But we've got to actually look at one step before that, and what's the priorities and who's determining our country's priorities? And how do we ensure
So Dhartia, maybe we need to cut to the next speaker. I think Pregs is having some trouble. She'll join again and we can pick up the conversation a little later on. Go ahead, Siddharthya.
She's the last speaker. Can we connect?
Oh, sorry about that.
Well, we can catch up with Pregs in our discussion, in our panel discussion. I have the honor of introducing Dr. Betty Govenden, who will recite one of her poems on women and empowerment, and I'm sure that we will be riveted. Dr. Govenden, thank you so much.
Do you want me to read it now?
Yes, please. Yes. And then we'll head into the panel discussion afterwards.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much.
I just want to keep a solemn silence, listening to everybody. Thank you. There's so much to ponder over, so much to do. And just listening to Pregs now, we could continue listening and thinking about what we should do. And thank you, Sister Sina, for reminding us of our heritage. I'll read my poem quickly. It was written a little while ago, but it's celebrating women, women in the struggle, women in our history, and making them alive for this time. I have two parts to the poem, and I'll send you a copy if you would like. So the first part deals with the women in the struggle in our history, and the second is a general reflection on the state of the world and of the country. Princess Mogogo, you are woman, the nation's bounty and peerless Imbongi. You use music to shake the citadels of power. You are woman. Nokatola Dube, you are woman, refusing to be mere helpmeet, singing of Africa, my native land, and now buried in a marked grave. You are woman. Phyllis Naidu, you are woman, claiming self and identity in the hallowed ancestry of sacrifice. You are woman. Charlotte Manyem Keke, you are woman, extolling the new African women long before our time, restoring Black women against alienation from land and self. You are woman. Bessie Head, you are woman, bewitched child of the rain wind, you turn the broken shards of memory into poetry. You are woman. Phila Ndwandwe, you are woman. We are bereft of words for your valor, lifting the spear of the nation. You refuse to betray the comrades. You are woman. Victoria Mkenga, you are woman, axed for your courage and for your stand at the assassin's hand. You are woman. Mama Dorothy Nomzazi Nyembe, you are woman. At the edge and in the forefront, leading the march for justice in prison and beyond. South Africa's longest serving woman political prisoner. You are woman. Emma Tandi Mashinini, you are woman. From the factory floor to Kliptown and the Freedom Charter to Pretoria Central Prison, strikes have followed you all your life. You are women. Mothers of our freedom, sisters of yesterday, under the southern sky, against the chains of tradition and the bondage of patriarchy, you railed and rallied, refusing to be silenced, muzzled, or handcuffed. Mothers of our freedom, sisters of yesterday, under the southern sky, you refused the indignity of slavery, denials of your voice, denials of your birthright in the land of your birth. Mothers of our freedom, sisters of yesterday, under the southern sky, you rode in fearless protest against the stone towers of power, braved the wrath of police batons, tear gas, and guns. Mothers of our freedom, sisters of yesterday, under the southern sky, you marched before us, refusing to live your years as a tale that is told, outcasts in his story. Mothers of our freedom, sisters of yesterday, under the southern sky, weeping beyond the grave for the revolutionary petunias now trampled on, victories won and lost, betrayals each new day. Mothers of our freedom, sisters of yesterday, under the southern sky, your daughters today are telling of your sacrifice, stories with soul, embroidered in our quilts and on our parchments, stained with blood. Mothers of our freedom, sisters of yesterday, your daughters of virtue in virtual spaces are dispelling the myths of the African women, made to order by thought tyrants and homophobic bullies. Sisters of our freedom, mothers of our freedom, sisters of yesterday, under the southern sky, your daughters today are weaving the unsayable, anguished for bodies scripted with warrior marks, prisoners of ritual and family name. Mothers of our freedom, sisters of yesterday, under the southern sky, your daughters today are storming the memory archives, crossing the fault lines in liberation history to expand the Freedom Charter. Thank you. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Dr. Govindan. I think anyone who would like to tell me we don't need poets and artists and our creatives really need to listen to Dr. Betty Govindan, to Dr. Lena Mshuope, because there is nothing more inspiring. Maybe it's a personal opinion, but there's really nothing more inspiring and powerful that comes from the words of wise and intelligent women. I'm so honored to be a part of this panel. Unfortunately, Pregs has not come back as yet, so we're just going to carry on with our panel discussion. I know we are going over time.
I think she has joined, so just double check.
Pregs, are you with us?
Yes, I'm back.
Sure. Okay, great. Would you like to maybe just finish off your thoughts there, and then we'll head into the panel discussion in about 2 or 3 minutes. Thank you.
The key point was really about who holds power in the world. And, I think that in 1994, when we came into Parliament, unfortunately, we thought we were there as the representatives of the people of our country. And the truth of the matter was that across the world, power had shifted away from publicly elected bodies like parliaments and governments to unelected, unaccountable bodies. So, for example, the United Nations as a whole, it's based in New York, and New York City has a greater budget than the entire United Nations. So how is the United Nations expected to hold accountable corporations which and their countries which have far greater budgets than than the entire governments and representative structures like the United Nations. So I think that the challenge really is about to what extent are we able to ensure that we don't collude, we're not corrupted by, and that the only solution then is what kind of power is able to be built, what kind of people's power is able to be built that is that cuts across all the different divides of our institutions, to be really focused on how do we end because I think that things such as gender-based violence are not just a cultural, is not just the result of cultural problems in different parts of the world. It's also about how, so if you take what's happening today in Afghanistan, the who funded the Taliban in the first instance? The United States armed and funded the Taliban. In Yemen, both sides of the conflict, for example, are funded by Britain. So
unfortunately, I think Preg's connection is, unless it's my connection, is a bit faulty. Selvin, can you just confirm that it's not me?
No, it's definitely not you. I think our connection is weak. So I think run with the program, and Pregs can hopefully join as we go along.
Thank you so much. I think what Pregs has really, as I said, she was going to end up concluding this, is she's asked the question, who holds the power in the world? We are going to carry on with the panel discussion because we don't want to lose the opportunity of having these amazing women on the same platform. So please join us as we engage with them. Who holds the power in the world? I think that's a very important question. When I was studying patent law and I looked at the World Trade Organization and how much power they had and the different agendas that were coming up, they were very much situated in the global North's interests. And I think Dr. Mshope had a very good point of we should not be imitating. Now, obviously, when we're looking at the World Trade Organization, we're looking a lot at technology and scientific discovery and things, but not restricted to that. We should not be imitating other countries. We should not be imitating Britain, US, the global North. We have our own identity, which is what Dr. Mshope and Dr. Ngidi pointed to, an African identity. And it is now our responsibility to evolve because we are not the same Africa that we were 200 years ago, even 100 years ago. We need to evolve with that. So I think what the other speakers have also touched on is this colonial agenda that still persists. It persists in our education. I mean, we still, my father always found it very amusing that we still wear the robes that came from the UK system of wearing the robes and the wigs, and we still wear blazers in the blazing Durban heat. So all these kinds of things makes us ask, what are we still perpetuating from colonial history? So I would like to ask the panel, do you think that there is still imitation occurring and that our education goals are still limited to what we have drawn on from a colonial past? So education goals that are situated in neoliberalist capitalism, that just supports this consumerism. I think we have lost our African roots where we actually are engaged in agriculture, even though we're trying to push that through tertiary education. We have lost many things. From our panelists, I would like to ask that question of, how do you think we can return or evolve our African heritage, our unique South African heritage, through a new education agenda that does not perpetuate inequalities and does not rely on imitation and borrowing policies and borrowing structures from the global North or other countries that, quite frankly, don't have the same interest or capacities that we do? I think if we could start if we could start with maybe Dr. Foster, if you are able to weigh in on that, and then see where we can go from there.
Hi, I think there's a lot of work being done currently, to dismantle those aspects of our colonial history. But the thing is that we have a long way to go. We're not prepared yet to have honest discussions about what the impact, of these different systems have been on us. And I think one of the things that we need to really be looking at is how we tackle these problems. What the hope that I have is that we have developed a national strategic plan on gender-based violence. That plan recognizes inequality, recognizes the issues of race, ethnicity, class differences that exacerbate violence against women. And I always locate my conversation in that violence against women sector, because structural violence impacts so hard on women's lives, as does social, political, and technological violence, as we saw during COVID. So I think, first of all, recognition that we are all subjected to violence as women. We have developed the discourse around that. The narratives have changed. They've become much more analytical and understanding of women's particular experiences. But the dismantling of the history it's not just the sector, it's throughout the country. And we are going to continue to see racial outbursts, inter-ethnic kind of challenges and conflicts occurring and so forth, because the decolonial project is a massive one, and it's one that is global, and we're all trying to address that. But I mean, coming back to some of the things that Pregs was saying and that I've said, is all of this stuff, as Pregs was saying, it emanates from the North. Those policies are set in the North. Those systems are conceived in the North and then exported or imposed on us in very violent ways, through our trade agreements. If you don't do this, we'll do that, we'll take this away from you, all that kind of stuff. So that inequality right at that global level, how the UN responds to certain conflicts, how quick the responses are, in cases of humanitarian crises like we have in Afghanistan now, all of those things come into play, and they're constructed on a geopolitical level. So when you want to try and deconstruct it at a national, local level, it's an almost impossible task. So, but it's never impossible, because systems have always been, we overturned the apartheid system here to some extent, although what we've got in place is not very good for us. But building from the ground up, this is what I want to say. We call ourselves a locally rooted, globally connected organization. Every bit of change will come from the ground up. And it is upon each of us, we have a responsibility in whichever place we are, to address inequality, to address racism, to address the social challenges, to build social cohesion from the ground up. It's never going to come to us from our political leadership. It has to come. So we have to all engage in training, skills building, capacity building, awareness raising, and then at a higher level in advocacy that brings about those changes. But until we can actually shift power into the hands of the majority of Black people, particularly of women, more particularly rural women, we're not going to see the shifts here. And those shifts are not going to happen without us tackling the economic environment in some way or another. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Foster, for that. I would like to ask Dr. Ngidi on your thoughts. As Dr. Foster has said, we're trying to build from the ground up, and you're working at a national level on social cohesion. What are some of the initiatives that your work or your advocacy is starting or has started, that is working at that grassroots level, that we as the youth could get involved in?
Definitely. It's a good question, and thank you. And first of all, let me thank my fellow panelists for the listening points. I'm just learning so much. And I just had to send a message to Princess Nikiwe Bam, who is doing an amazing work with the African Youth Leadership Initiative. And I said to her, I know you're busy, but can you just do 2 minutes and hear? Because I know her extension of working with us at the Africology Institute has allowed us to see a greater way in which the youth want to engage these changes. But you know what happened in March 2020? I decided that I was done with this thing of institutionalized organizations, and in terms of universities and tertiaries, and so I had to create my own space where and Sis Trina, with all her prayers and support, you know, really pushed me to make sure that I stayed the course when we were really giving up, that nobody understood what the role of Africology is and what we're trying to maintain. And what we want to do is to undo some of these colonial legacies that are useless and of no benefit to woman, man, dog, or cat. And so one of the things that we really realized that we needed to find our own spaces, we needed to get young people in the space. Every Saturday from January this year until this day, we have 90 young people that come to our programs. We have 56 young children who are learning how to read, you know, read loudly. You know, when Sistina came, she reminded them, read in isiZulu, read so that you can get an appreciation of who you are as a person. So, you know, I'm saying that some of us who are not so-called the known organizations, the ones that people will, you know, automatically run to, we need to find ways to assist, to support, to get the word out there that we are doing things in an alternative way. And I like the speaker before. So as an advocate, I have chosen an agency, and my agency is advocacy and knowledge. You know, I want to make sure that whatever knowledge people are getting, I am sitting there to also give the so-called alternative knowledge, not really alternative, but African knowledge. And to deal with the misrepresentation of knowledge systems in our society, and to undo the embedded way of which we learn, because it's not everybody that learns in a university is learned, you know. And during the time that we have set up the Institute of Africology in the South Coast in Inequality, I have learned so much from indigenous women. You know, I mean, we're about to go into planting now. And I thought, okay, the rain is here, let's plant. And they were like, no, mama, we have to start getting the ground ready. We have to decide which crops is gonna give us, you know, a quicker yield. All those I could not have learned if I was still sitting at DUT or other places where I've been sitting. So for me, my advice is, like the sister before me said, be active in your agency. You know, skills development cannot be undermined. Training cannot be you know, enough. And shifting power to women, absolutely. And not shifting power in the kind of way that we see people want the Pentagon to go one extreme. We're saying shifting power in the woman-centric way, which we say leading from the middle. As women, when we are in the integral part of the spoke of the wheel, we move into the way that we move around our communities instead of trying to be on top, instead of trying to be below, instead of trying to always be, you know, but we are at the center. We are centrifugal to everything that happens in our society. So thank you so much, 1860, and I really am looking forward to more collaborations. I think young people in South Africa, they have the answer, but they also need to be patient with some of us older people who are getting older also, because we have had a lot of experiences. And we need to be able to share these experiences so you are able and equipped to make decisions that will not bring you back to these discussions. So, siyabonga kakhulu to my panelists and to 1860. Thank you, Your Excellency, Princess Nikiwe Bam, for joining us.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ngidi. There were so many points there that I just wanted to touch on and then relay that to the other speakers. You talk about this intergenerational learning, which I think is vital. And I think that the older generations have knowledge that we have stopped tapping into because of a colonial agenda of our education. You know, the reason I don't like it when people say that I'm studying a PhD is because I honestly feel like I know nothing. I don't know how to grow food, but I'm studying food systems. It is a complete paradox, and it's not something that, makes sense to me. So I think, and that exactly what I was pointing to with, you gave the example of being able to grow crops. That is such a vital, if we all know how to grow crops and keep our own hunger at bay, the issues of inequality start to lessen and we can start to address other things. So I want to point that back to Fasiha. How, in your role as it is now, what kind of intergenerational learning is there? And what do you think is the propensity for alternative education systems where we're not reliant on tertiary education to teach us about theoretical paradigms and practice and all sorts of things that honestly are not practical? Do you think that there is a scope amongst the youth for practical education skills that we can actually use to make our lives better, to live, really? Fasiha? I'm not sure if she's on. Yes, she is. If Fasiha is unable to answer, I think I'll relay that to Dr. Mshope if she would like to take that.
Hello. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. It's been such an informative this discussion, and everybody bringing so much wealth, and the element of looking at intergenerational dialogue is crucial. There is so much that we can learn from one another, young and old, and talking about creating their own nourishment. They feel South Coast, working with rural women out there. And also, there are so many people in spaces where they're talking about indigenous knowledge systems. And unless we are prepared to listen, listening is an art form. Unless we are prepared to listen to those who came before us, we will miss the train. We will be busy searching for books that are written somewhere in America, books that are written somewhere in Germany, that are written somewhere in Asia, and we're copying them and we imitate what they're doing. There is so much wealth here in our part of the world. I also look at the way the way things are done in educational institutions. There's so much theory, and sometimes there's not enough practicality. I think there should be more of that. They should learn that they must be teaching the theory. They should be teaching all the academic ways of doing things, but make sure they understand that we are living in a particular country. Sometimes when I'm listening to certain people speaking about issues that are affecting us, and these agendas that come from the corporates, from the conglomerates and the people with lots of money, swaying us, telling us through adverts, through everything. Look at how much pushing is being done to get Black women to drink. Every time you watch television, let's get Black women drinking. We need African women, colored women, Indian women to be alcoholics so that they can make money, these people who are brewing all of these alcohols. And once you weaken the female race, then you've weakened the whole nation. Once you've done that, you are the winner. So that's extremely important. And we don't talk about that. And also, I look at the way the books that are available. I don't know if you've noticed under lockdown, some people have tried to have small gardens in their homes, even in boxes and getting food that they didn't think they could grow themselves. And suddenly they're growing their own food. That's extremely important. That's dealing with poverty. And then there's also the element of audio books. And when you're looking at audio books, how many books are coming from the African continent? Hello, there's a major shortage of the voice from the African continent, or books from communities, by Aboriginal communities, by Indian communities, by people in Mexico, in Guatemala, in Barbados. So all of these indigenous communities, don't you think their stories matter? Their stories matter. So we cannot go around complaining about that. We need to get into the studios and record those stories. Let people hear about Ruth First. Let people hear about Mama Fatima Mir. Let people hear about many, many great names out there. Let them hear the voices, because the voices that speak, when you hear a voice speaking about a story that they know. Our sister Pregs Govinda, her book I have shared with so many people. It's called Love and Courage. Honestly, I wish more people would read that book. Imagine, this is a challenge, my sister, wherever you are, get that book, get into the studio, read it. You've got a lovely voice. You know how to tell a good story. Get into the studio, narrate your own voice, and in your own voice, your book, because it's a beautiful, beautiful book. And this is said to be the year of Charlotte Maxeke. Mama Charlotte Maxeke, we hardly ever talk about her. Now and again, boom, 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 they mention her in passing, the politicians. How many people know who she was, where she came from? I've just been rereading the autobiography of her sister, Katie Makanya, who worked with Dr. McCord, one of the first nurses ever in KwaZulu-Natal, before even the McCord Hospital was built. What a story, what a narrative. There are many stories like these that need to be read out loud. Or you talk about my role model, my heavyweight, Mama Nokukanya Lutuli, the wife of Chief Albert Lutuli, a teacher, a nation builder, an amazing, positive woman who inspired so many to also look at the rights to have title deeds for the land, to understand that this is your power, this is your land. Once the white man comes and says he wants to take your land away, you've got to hit them with his own medicine. This is the land of our ancestors, and many have learned that. And let's encourage young people to be educated, no matter what, whatever, all of these little things we want, the iPads and the what, these things are important because we are learning via the internet, but let's get as much education as possible. Let's arm ourselves for success, because once our children are educated, all of these big powers can't touch them.
Thank you so much.
Education, that's everything.
Thank you, Dr. Mshope, for that. And on that point, and thank you for bringing up Pregs Govinda's book, Love, Courage, and Insubordination. She shared it on our chat. Pregs, can you speak more to, and you can broaden this, but I'm looking at how stories, you were talking about the control of the global north and who controls various narratives and various power structures. What is the role of stories, the South African stories, in dissolving that and creating a power structure for South Africa to use going forward?
I think stories are very powerful. Everything is falling apart. Stories are an extremely powerful way of either reaffirming the existing status quo, the existing hierarchies of inferiority, superiority, etc., or the stereotypes, or to transform those and to capture through the reality of people's lives a different vision. So, I mean, I just wanted to take a small example in terms of, I think Tina was talking about Indigenous people, and I think it's come up again and again. And there's a case right now in the Western Cape about a piece of land that the Indigenous people called the Land of the Stars. It's between two rivers, and the Indigenous people have taken the powerful corporate developers, as well as the city of Cape Town and the province to court over the plans to build Amazon's offices on this land, which is regarded as sacred land, and which is a floodplain that should be a heritage precinct. Environmentalists have warned of the dangers of building on a floodplain, and it's the very same argument that the city used against building low-cost housing on a golf course that an organization that works with people who are homeless actually here in the Cape was trying to actually shift, was to get low-cost housing on a golf course. And this is one of several golf courses. It's one of 24 golf courses and driving ranges and 26 bowling greens in the city.
Okay, sorry, I think we've lost Pregs again. Unfortunately, she's had a bit of connection issues. But if I could just pose a question quickly to Fasia, and then I'll pose my last question to Ms. Aziz after that. Fasia,
Susie?
yes.
Could I just say at some point if we could ask a comment from Her Royal Highness?
Yes, of course.
Okay, thanks.
If I could just ask Fasia this question, just a quick, maybe a quick discussion on, do you think our education priorities need to shift so that, linking to what Dr. Ngidi and Dr. Mshkope have said, need to shift so that we encourage education that allows us to nourish ourselves as the youth? And what can the youth do to advocate for that? Fasia? Okay, I think Fasia is also having some connection issues as well. So if I could just move to my, if I could actually at this point maybe ask Her Royal Highness to give a quick commentary. It's so lovely to have you here with us today. Thank you so much. I think maybe she wasn't quite prepared. So I'll, just because of time, I'll move quickly on to Lisa. Our education system at the moment, it's I pose a question to Fasia about, do you think our education priorities are correct? And Action in Autism, I know, has different programs, or at least tried different programs where, for example, gardening and I think catering and things like that. Could you speak more to that as a form of education that allows us to get back to our roots and allows us to have practical knowledge for people with disabilities, but also, people just in general?
Thanks, Sid. That's a lovely question. And I think that our focus should be on education. I mean, educating the mind is the one thing that is most powerful. You cannot take knowledge away from somebody, and you are constantly going to increase the knowledge base in our communities, indigenous knowledge base, etc. And what we're searching for is inclusive communities, inclusive economies, inclusive education. And more than 15% of the world population has disability. And so if we don't include our people with disability, then we're always going to keep them on the margins of very vulnerable communities. And also that they bring new insight into the world. They bring in a new way of seeing the world that can bring incredible value and add a richness to the knowledge base that we have. So I also want to just quickly speak to the community gardens that I'd also been reading up on, that Abishlali Basem John Dolo have created these amazing community gardens on common areas to ensure that people can live off the earth and that they can eat these fresh vegetables and never go hungry. And they've been doing it across 3 communities within KZN. And I think these are remarkable stories that we need to emulate, to say that they are creating these gardens not so much for resale, but to ensure that nobody within their community can go to bed hungry. And I think it's a great travesty of justice and our climate change in terms of what's happening with climate change, that we have all these golf courses that are taking up so much of water and that are taking up spaces where people can live. And that is a huge travesty of justice, and we must change that. And we have to keep governments and our leadership, hold them accountable to say, well, how are you changing the hands of the economy and the power hands, etc., and ensuring that we have indigenous knowledge systems and we support those and provide resource and support to those who are constantly adding to our indigenous knowledge systems. And then also just to speak to what Tina has been saying, such amazing things about our artists. And our artists are a repository of knowledge, and they bring a lot of beauty to the world, but in addition, they comment on society and bring healing to society. So if we don't nurture our artists in South Africa, that's also going to be very, very sad. We haven't done enough in this country to support our artists. And they're a dying breed of people. I mean, we had such a rich a community of artists during the apartheid era that brought the change in this country, and we need to continue to do that to bring healing to this country. And then to speak to what we are doing at Action in Autism is that we created a training facility, and it was a business skills and training facility. We didn't want to create a protected workspace because we believe in the agency of our persons with disability. So we created an Indigenous garden where they learn gardening and they learn expertise knowledge on the soil, on agriculture, and then they can go out and create their own businesses. And those who cannot, who need a supportive environment, will continue at Action in Autism, creating mini businesses in catering. So it's catering, it's Indigenous gardening systems, it's a business administration that they learn, basic computer skills, how to run a business, etc. And they do arts and crafts, all with the knowledge that we want them to enter into the open market economy, and they ought to become owners of their own micro businesses. So that is important for us to empower our young people with disability. And if each of us continues to do in our own small way, continues to work and keep our shoulder to the wheel, we can effect change in this country. And it was just so amazing to see all our powerful women today and to hear their stories.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lisa. You know, I think those skills that you are teaching in Action in Autism are absolutely important. And I think sometimes far more important than what we do in tertiary education. Unfortunately, I will not be able to ask for CFO comments there. We do have a comment from Her Royal Highness, if she would like to step on quickly to maybe clarify her comment, and then we'll have a 30-second wrap up from each of the speakers. And we will be able to close the program, even though I'm sure we could go on for another 2 hours easily and keep our audience, well, hold them hostage, because I think they're quite, you know, captivated by the discussion today. Your Royal Highness.
Am I audible? Okay, thank you so much. Thank you for the opportunity. I'm sorry, I'm on the road, but I just thought I should just come in, and thank you for the invitation. Yes, I think the speakers have already mentioned some of the practical activities that we need to continuously teach the young people. There is gardening. Mama Utrina has also been touching as well on other skills that must be very practical. I admire her and Maya Ashantua so much, because I know that they have been in the forefront of actually doing more than just talking. So yes, young people need to learn more now in schools other than the theory. Food gardening, food security, we have issues about food security. Much of our young people, they don't know indigenous herbs, you know, so if we can also teach indigenous knowledge accompanied by indigenous herbs, while we also learn a lot about our history. So it's very important to connect with our roots as well, to know who we are, because we can always take what we learn from school and we use it to learn other things and also assist mostly in our communities. So I just also touched on issues of industries like tourism industry, because I believe heritage storytelling, like Mama Trinamklop, what she has been doing. I grew up listening as well from her stories on radio and all that, and how she used to narrate in Tsomi and those stories. So storytelling is very good, because if as young people we don't learn that, we won't be able to narrate our history. We're going to have people that are going to come to our areas who are interested in knowing who we are, our history, and so on. So we need to learn such skills as well, to learn to narrate the stories. And also our culture and our heritage is very important, because now we need tourists that are actually going to come to view our rural areas and interact with young people. We were talking about food, we were talking about indigenous gardens, we were talking about culture, artists, you know, the art that you do is very special, from music to fine arts to crafting and all that. So we need to embrace all those skills that the young people are possessing in our rural communities as well, so that the tourists cannot just end up in big cities. They must go there and grow the economy of our communities. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Your Royal Highness. I completely agree. You know, when you're going into rural Europe, a lot of tourists go into rural Europe because of the charm, because there's a culture there. And, you know, you'll go to Italy and there's a whole culture around how to make balsamic vinegar, for example. Where's that with us? I'm ashamed to say I don't even know what our indigenous plants and herbs are, because that's not something that's taught to us. Yet, if it is taught, there's a whole industry there that we could be engaging in. So I would just like to ask the speakers to please wrap up for 30 seconds. We'll start with Fasia and then just move in order, in the order that it was spoken, whoever can, because I think sometimes the connection is a bit difficult. So Fasia, if you can just kick us off with a 30-second wrap up.
Thanks, Siri. Apologies. I'm also a bit multitasking. Today is one of those days where everything's happening at the same time. But I think today's been such an important discussion, and I quite like the decolonial element that's come in. And it's not something that we speak about enough. And we always think that decolonization is only around education systems or only around the social sciences. And we haven't even got into a discussion about how we decolonize mathematics or medicine or astronomy. And a lot of people think that this is something where you can only decolonize the social sciences because they think it's purely about the content, when in reality there's a whole history that was erased of people of color contribution across the world, across time, that has just been not acknowledged. So we could have a whole other discussion about it, and maybe we should. Maybe the Heritage Center needs to look at this. But the decolonial idea of what we've been pushing both in higher education is also something we need to be doing in our society. So for me, it's a very exciting thing. It's something where we also need to decolonize even governance. Now that I'm in the governance sector, we use a parliamentary system so similar to the Westminster system, and is that really what's useful? Is that really how we want to do service delivery? Is that really how we want to build a society? And I think that maybe we need to relook at that. So I'm encouraging, hopefully the next conversation will be something around that, and hopefully we can get more young people into the space. But thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Fasia. Dr. Foster.
Thank you so much, Stathia. I think that we need to look at gender-based violence as a whole of society problem. That's one of the things we need to do. And we need to address it from the historical perspective, looking at violence within the colonial project, looking at it in apartheid, seeing how it constructed gender identities, how toxic masculinities are born out of both of those projects and have become, normalized in our society. We need to be working towards gender equality. That is the principle on which we need to rest the work of eliminating violence against women. If we have an unequal society, if we fail to look at the structural impediments, the political, economic, social, technological that there are to women, then we are not addressing the issue holistically. We are not coming with a deep analysis of what women's experiences are and their lived realities. Everything we do has to be from a feminist perspective, which is really grounded in women's lived realities and experiences. We will not have an impact unless we address the structural drivers, and we understand that it is an enormous problem because it's structured and set up in the geopolitical sphere, but we cannot sit back and say, well, we'll only tinker at it, at a local level. We need a structural shift from thinking about violence against women as a social welfare problem and to work on repoliticizing it. Violence against women is a political issue, and it needs to be dealt with politically as much as what it is dealt with on a social issue. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Foster. If we could have Dr. Ngidi, if she's still with us. I think she may have stepped off.
She's left, so we
okay.
can move on.
If we can have Lisa Aziz, please.
Just a great big thank you to the 1860 Heritage Council, the Centre, just to say this was an amazing engagement and we need more of this. And it was amazing to see these powerful women and what they are doing, and that we need to surge forward to bring gender equity. And I absolutely support what Leslie Ann says, that everybody needs to be brought into the conversation regarding gender development and gender equity. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lisa. And Dr. Mshuape, please. I think Dr. Mshuape has also stepped off. If Pregs is available for 30 seconds, I'm so sorry about the connection. Preg?
Not sure what's been going on, but quick bit. I think the question of how do we hold accountable both those we elect into political power and those who hold real economic power in the world. We need to hold both to account. And so, for example, in terms of the vaccines that I spoke about, I think I'm going to actually put my video off so I can. So I think if you think about the vaccines that I spoke about, they were developed with public funding. So, and that's a fact, that the vaccines that were patented by private corporations were actually developed by public funding. And that's across the world. And so the more and more the people of the world in our different countries realize that we cannot solve these problems simply as individual countries, that it's a global system, and the UN, the Declaration of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was very clear that you cannot actually realize the individual rights within the declaration, and for that matter within our constitution, if you don't address the international social and economic order that has created the poverty, the unemployment, the inequality. And that's what we have to actually address. It's not just about, the issue of corruption, because the issue of corruption is always going to be there. So for example, as an MP, when I opposed the arms deal, when it came to the defense budget vote, when it was going to be implemented in the defense budget vote, my argument wasn't that simply about corruption, because corruption, I assumed, would follow, because all the countries selling us arms build corruption into the legislative and policy processes. So, for example, the contract that I spoke about earlier in terms of the vaccines, that is an absolutely dreadful thing to say. So you're effectively saying to countries, to South Africa, you either accept the terms on which we're actually having our vaccines produced there, that in fact is not going to address what we've committed to giving you 30-odd million vaccines, because we're going to send it to the EU. And so I think that those issues of how do we address ways of working, which are about, the Global Financial Integrity, for example, estimates that global illicit financial flows that happen, that's effectively corporate theft, cost South Africa $80 billion a year. And it's off our radar screen. So parliamentarians, local government, and entire civil society has to address how do we change these the structural power that either makes putting women into positions of power an ineffective thing or a powerful thing that will be able to act with solidarity. Thanks very much, everyone. It was really great to listen to all of you.
Thank you so much, Pregs, for your insights there. We're just going to wrap up the discussions today, and that's a massive task because we've had such a wealth of experience coming at us from a range of backgrounds. But I think that what stands out for me is that we have very powerful female leadership in this country, and that there is optimism, a pragmatic optimism that we can look to. We have intergenerational learning that needs to occur, and we also need to prioritize skills that actually narrow that inequality gap. And I think that's a discussion that maybe the 1816 Heritage Center can have at a later point, is what skills do we really need to narrow that inequality gap? I think that's a question I'm interested in, and that the speakers have raised as well. I would like to thank all our panelists here today for taking the time to be with us and sharing their insights. I know that a few were multitasking and were managing, going in and out of meetings, and we really appreciate what you have done today for us. I would also like to thank Dr. Betty Govinden for her poetry and for coordinating this, as well as Salvan and his team at the 1860 Heritage Center for putting this together. We hope that you will continue to come to more dialogues.
Auntie Betty is just fine.
To more dialogues, and that you will also view the installations, the very important installations of our South African history at the Heritage Center, which is in Durban. And I think they have a very powerful installation on women, the women's struggle in South Africa, which Salvan has put up on the screen at the moment. And it's really worthwhile to look at that. Thank you very much to the attendees who have been so patient with us, even though we have gone over time a bit. I'm sure that you have enjoyed this as much as we have, and enjoy your weekend. And thank you very much for being here.